Hi, I'm Eve Palay. I'm a tall, stylish, transgender woman of a certain age living on Bainbridge Island. What you're going to hear is from my larger work, Notes from the Poulsbohemian, stories of my transition in my later life. This one is a quick guide to the 90s, Thursday night cross-dressing in Seattle. Thursday nights were the weirdest time to be out for me. They were also the only nights I went out, the only time I left off from being the home dad and husband I was. Outside of that shift, I admit none of it was all that dramatic. Thursday night was my therapy appointment and also the night of the support group for cross-dressers at the Ingersoll Gender Center and the once-a-month cross-dressers social group that met in a basement in a church in Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. The word transgender was barely coming into style, and there was still a separation between transsexuals and your run-of-the-mill, not really committed transvestites. Back then, you did not say cisgender women, you'd say genetic girls, or just G-girls. The changes in language. I never knew why, but one Thursday night, the transsexuals were coming out from a meeting at Ingersoll before I went in. They usually met on Wednesdays, and it was clear that ordinary cross-dressers just didn't cut it with them. But this was our night, and I saw 3 of them coming out together, laughing and enjoying each other, and they stopped to introduce themselves to me. They were Wendy, and Wendy. And of course they all laughed at that as well, or at the really look I couldn't help stop crossing my face. Another time at Ingersoll, I was sitting across from Sarah, the wonderfully huge ex-Marine who was moderating the night. We were joined by Chrissy, who was then with her, or with quote marks, her supportive G-girl girlfriend, Christy, and then the female-to-male FTM, Chris, showed up, turned his chair around backwards and straddled the seat and belched. I don't actually know if it was Chris with a K or Chris with a C. It's not like we were spell-checked at the door, not that we even had spell-check back then. However I use pronouns in this is just a guess. We all avoided pronouns as much as we could, easily called each other girl, and we were all determined to separate gender and sexuality. I had a wife and 2 small kids back home, and I'd be back there in another hour or so. Besides, it would be nearly 20 years before I let myself care about pronouns for myself. I got really good at changing and putting on makeup in a small Nissan Pulsar. I got good at finding out-of-the-way parking spaces to do this in the early evening. A university vehicle holding lot was a favorite, being a triangle of asphalt beneath the bridge. I'm 6'3", my height mostly in my legs, so getting pantyhose on in a tiny Pulsar was a challenge. Got runs and tons of them, but managed to manage and then made sure no one was in sight when I took off my shirt, slipped on a front clasp wonder bra, and pulled on a long dress, well, mid-calf for me, over my head. Why a dress? It seemed safer in my mind than to risk mismatching a skirt and top. There was a Sheila at a small boutique shop on the 2nd floor of the Wallingford building, a converted old school. No, I'm not being Australian. 23andMe says I'm 98.6 Ashkenaz Jew. Her name really was Sheila. I did that tired old thing and said I was buying for my girlfriend, and Sheila said, "What size?" And I raised my hand until it reached the top of my head. She asked if I wanted to try it on. It was a sort of nubbly top, a loose empire, and I can still wear it 25 years later. It never goes out of style. One time, I walked down the back staircase of the center, opened the door, and ran into a tweener boy and his parents. They stepped back, and the boy started laughing. The worst thing was that his parents hesitated, and then joined in the laughter. I put my head down and made it back to the car and to my therapy session with Marta. I have no recollection what I said to her that night. I still wonder what sort of parents they thought they were being. Sometimes I changed in the Wallingford Center parking lot, sometimes at Marta's. I'd park there, change, and then go across the street to get a latte at the small stand there. I got a coffee card that I tacked up to the wall using the name Tai, T-A-I, short for Shabbatai, my Hebrew name. There was a futon store next door, and all this became so much a routine that the futon store owner used to wave at me before I crossed the street back to see Marta. Years later, when we moved to Bainbridge, this owner was at the house of a friend for a holiday party. He recognized me even though I was certainly not cross-dressed at this friend's or anywhere on Bainbridge in those years, and he said how much he'd always wanted to come out and talk to me, but I always looked in a rush. Being laughed at, or being someone people were eager to meet, this was all new to me. Sometimes I'd find a discreet place to park and change on the street of the then not fashionable Ballard neighborhood, and then pulled the car around to the church where Emerald City, the cross-dressers group, would meet in the church basement. They were the reason I chose Ty. The first time I went in, as nervous as I could be, almost literally slinking into the room, I got a friendly welcome from a member, Karen, who asked my name, and I realized I hadn't ever come up with one. I had never invented an alternate personality for when I was cross-dressed, had no feminine persona apart from myself, never thought of myself as a different person, but clearly I needed to deal with this name issue, so I started to say Shabbatai, my Hebrew name, but quickly decided on Ty. That was fine with Karen, who went on to welcome another guest, and then she came back while I was just standing there wondering what I was supposed to do now, and she suggested I'd have a more feminine, appropriate stance if I moved my right foot so it was just off perpendicular to my left. So I did, and felt no change at all, but the welcome was nice. Most of what we did at Emerald City was to try to make each other comfortable. A common reaction of a newcomer was to gasp in disbelief of herself, and we had no female-to-male members then, that she was here, that she was cross-dressed practically in public, and that she might really belong with all these other cross-dressers. By the third time I was there, I figured the best I could do was to adapt by helping others adapt. I welcomed Linda to the meeting, and just kept shaking my head while she repeated, I feel so stupid, again and again. After a while, she told me about the electrolysis tweezers she was making for herself, what to look for in a good dog, and about her train set. Linda was in her 50s, dressed in a crisp white blouse with nicely tailored camel jacket and a dark brown mid-length skirt. I saw her wear a couple of nice outfits, so clearly she didn't get dressed like that in a car, unlike me, who bought clothes based on how they would look after being kept in the backpack I'd bought for them. I'd say Linda was a friend back then, though I didn't know much about her life at all. Anonymity was the rule at Emerald City. No pictures without permission, no place in the 90s to post them. And this was such a rule that none of us stopped to think that it was really the price of admission. Emerald City was not a happening place. We were not hip, we were not chic, we skewed older, and our styles tended to be conservative and somewhat dated. Someone had the idea to invite a drag queen in to give us makeup and deportment tips. But the truth is the last thing any of us wanted was to look like a drag queen, a persona that demands attention. We all just wanted to get by, to be seen as normal as we might manage to possibly fake, to accept each other in the hope we might accept ourselves. One warm evening, in the amber glow of the setting sun, I came to the church and saw that everyone was gathered on the lawn, milling about and standing outside, something we never did. It turned out we were waiting for someone to find the key that would let us in. When I pulled up and saw us all in the fresh air in little groups chatting here and there, all I could think was that we looked like a bridge party gone horribly wrong. Horribly? Well, that choice of words says something. Let's just say a bridge party gone wrong. But is wrong any better? Is that word just my background noise and judgment, or did we all share it back then? I never thought I could pass. The good of that was that I never worried about being read. In fact, I had a hard time being read the other way around. I mean, it was in the 90s that I had my ears pierced. I started wearing a Chai, the 18th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, also the word for life, as in L'chaim, on my necklace, even after a daughter pointed out Antonio Banderas was doing it, started painting my nails a shiny dime silver, which led to the guy at the meat department at the grocery store to ask, like, are you in a rock band or something? The tough thing was that I lost my hair in the 90s. I'd had alopecia areata, a couple of nickel-sized bald spots, easily covered, for 2 decades, but now my hair was coming out in clumps. What would become alopecia universal, almost all the hair on my body, so I shaved my head. Did I get a wig then? Nope. I started wearing nice berets, plain black or gray during the week, and a velvet red brocade at my therapist or at groups. It felt right and somewhat honest. Besides, I didn't have a place to keep a wig, and it wouldn't work in my backpack, which is to say maybe that a wig was just too big a commitment. This wasn't the first time I'd taken to berets. Back in the 70s, when I was in my 20s, I used to go to a bar on the Lower East Side of Milwaukee, just off Brady Street, to throw darts. Back then I wore a black beret, jean, and maybe a shiny white acetate shirt, one embroidered with some black and silver western swirls. Was that cross-dressing? Attention-getting? Did anyone judge me for that? No, nope, and at least not to my face. The bar could get a bit rowdy, and one night, let's pretend it was a Thursday, this really obnoxious drunk came back to the darts alcove and started making some sort of scene, which I ignored until it was my shot, and he bumped me, and I just grabbed him and threw him up against the wall. I held him off his feet and shouted right into his face, "You do not get in the way of my game." Then I marched him out of the bar and he stumbled into the street. I went back to my game, stopping only to take a scotch on the rocks from the bartender who nodded his thanks, and then picked up the game with my friend John like it was just another Thursday night. Not that I ever did anything like that before or since. Thursday nights in Seattle in the 90s, whether after therapy or leaving one of the groups early, I'd stop and meet John for a beer at the Easy Street Tavern on the edge of the Wallingford neighborhood. I'd change back into my guy clothes on the way, placing the shoes with the silver studs, my little black purse with my makeup, my hose, and the dress away in the back of the Pulsar. It got to be that John's friends would join us, that Thursdays at the Easy Streets became a group ritual, with none of them besides John knowing this night was chosen only because of my therapy appointment. But sometimes it was just John and me, two born Badgers who met in a writing class at the University of Wisconsin, and one time John, who'd gone through a number of therapists since his psychotic break the decade before, asked me how I could be seeing a woman therapist, saying, without thinking what's under her skirt. I looked at him, amazed he could even think like that, but I took the easy way out and said, "John, this is serious therapy. I'm the one wearing a dress." He laughed. It was a good joke. What would he think if he knew it was true? What should I have said to him to let him know how appalling I found his question? We'd been friends for over 20 years. In fact, he was my only good friend, and it seems I was both okay with not being known and not knowing. Does that make me different from anyone else? I have my doubts. Wait, why did I bring up the dart story? What am I trying to prove? All the rest of these things are things I've mentioned in passing at the Poulsbohemian coffeehouse, talking about transition to new friends, things anyone might have overheard, except for this. The absolutely weirdest thing about Thursday nights, and it happened every time, was coming home, my kids asleep, my wife in bed already, and stepping back into my ever so quiet normal life where I drive the kids to and from school and sports, get food on the table, help with my wife's business, and if it was a warm day, I was just fine with being the guy kneeling on our patch of front yard, just the head of an old rusty pickaxe in my hands, breaking up the hard, stony glacial till, what passed for our soil, so one day we could have a nice little lawn. And as soon as we had it, in 2000, we moved to Bainbridge Island, where I could put all this behind me.